World News from the BBC. The businessman Carson Yeung has pleaded not guilty to 5 counts of money laundering at the beginning of a trial in Hong Kong. Mr Yeung, who owns the English football club Birmingham City, is accused of moving almost $100 million illicitly through bank accounts he controls. The judge agreed to an adjournment after Mr Yeung's lawyers argued that delays in the police investigation would lead to an unfair trial. The Chinese authorities say they've made more arrests after violent clashes which killed 21 people in the western province of Xinjiang last week. They called those arrested terrorists and said police had found weapons and flags belonging to the East Turkestan Islamic movement. But some local people have told the BBC that violence was caused by Chinese officials pressurising Muslim men to shave off their beards. European Union experts are meeting to decide whether to ban pesticides which have been blamed for a drastic decline in bee populations. Chemical companies say the science in the case is inconclusive and that a ban would harm food production because supporters argue there is growing evidence of a link. Matt Shardlow, chief executive of the conservation charity Badh Life, argues that bees as pollinators need protection.
It's appalling that we've had to come to this stage because they're not listening to the science. There's a vast amount of evidence showing now the impacts that neonicotinoid pesticides can have on wild bees and other pollinators. They're an absolutely key part of the environment and our ecosystems, and they're worth more, frankly, to the agricultural system than the pesticides that we're using at the moment.
Officials in Nepal say they're investigating reports of a punch-up high on the slopes of Mount Everest. The fight apparently broke out between 3 international climbers and their local Sherpa guides. Both sides are reported to blame each other for the incident. Each year in April and May, hundreds of people flock to the Himalayas to try to climb the world's highest mountain. BBC News.
That was Fiona MacDonald. I'm Jackie Leonard, and this is the Newsroom, world news from BBC correspondents around the world. In this edition, we'll be hearing about the bomb attack on the Syrian Prime Minister's convoy and what's meant to be a revolution in British welfare culture, starting on a very small scale today. First, though, to Bangladesh and the rubble of a factory building that collapsed last Wednesday, killing hundreds and trapping hundreds more. Now, 5 days after the disaster, the Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, has gone to the scene. She met survivors and relatives of some of those killed. About 3,000 people worked at the factory, and some of them were trapped under debris for days. Dr. Rakib Murat was one of the first on the scene to help after the collapse of the building.
It was very difficult to get to them. They are behind a big concrete beam, and there's just a small space we can talk through. I was talking to one woman a lot, and as we were digging, she was trying to help from the other side. She was saying there were lots of bodies around her. We had to push through hundreds of bodies to get to them. The smell is overpowering.
Tanaweh Ahmed is one of the teenage volunteers who are small enough to squeeze through narrow gaps in order to reach those trapped beneath the rubble. He describes the desperation of those hoping to be rescued.
I have amputated hands to get people out. The doctor won't go in themselves. There was a woman who had her hand trapped, and she shouted, "Brother, please cut off my hand, or give me a knife, and I'll do it myself." There was another woman. Our team leader said, "Don't go too close, or she'll grab you and won't let you go." So I just gave her water, but later we got her out. Why do I take this risk? I have to. Imagine if it was my brother in there.
But the hope of finding survivors has now faded, and instead of digging by hand, heavy machinery is clearing away the debris. Our correspondent Ambarasan Etirajan is in Dhaka and joins us now. So Ambarasan, first of all, just describe what's happening at the scene at the moment.
Probably you can hear the sound of the bulldozer going through this rubble just behind me, about 20 meters from where I am standing now. The heavy machinery was thrust into action soon after midnight. They started clearing this place, and then this morning the cranes and bulldozers and earth movers were thrust into action. This building is being completely demolished part by part, and all this rubble are being taken away by trucks. I can see they're going in line and then dumping this rubble in another part of this road. Meanwhile, the relatives of those missing are eagerly waiting, anxiously waiting, many of them crying inconsolably. to learn about the fate of the loving ones who were inside this building till Wednesday. And the rescue teams have been pulled out from the most part of the building, and they haven't found any survivors yet. They took the decision after they realized that they could not find any survivors, and the cries of the people who were inside, they're becoming feeble and feeble. There were some very heart-moving stories how they had to leave some people behind because they could see them, they could communicate with them, but they could not get through this hard concrete rubble.
Just finally, Ambaras, and obviously the garment trade is very, very important to Bangladesh, and there are a lot of other factories. Are people who work in them concerned? Is there any sort of climate of fear, concern that other buildings might also be dangerous?
There are concerns. There were reports about a couple of factories showing cracks, but nothing has happened so far. Now, the government itself is taking action to inspect various factories. Now, this is very important. You rightly pointed out for Bangladesh. This constitutes about 80% of the country's total exports. Clothes produced here in this country, you can find them in the high streets of any major cities like London or Berlin or in New York. So this is very important, employing 3.5 million people. So now, the garment factory workers are very angry. This is the third incident in the last 6 months. In last November, more than 100 workers were killed in a fire accident. Then, now there's a third incident. So they are very worried about the safety of these buildings. As many Western retailers come to Bangladesh because of the cost, because of the low-cost clothing, at the same time, they're also now workers are concerned that the Western retailers are whether they are putting enough pressure or not on the factory owners to improve safety standards.
Ambarasan, thank you. That was Ambarasan Etirajan in Dhaka. We heard there about the anger of the workers. What are the political implications of the tragedy? Has it taken the Prime Minister too long to appear at the scene? Sabir Mustafa is the head of the BBC Bengali service, and he's here in the newsroom studio. So, first of all, Sabir, the arrested owner of this factory has political links. He's part of the Awami Party's youth wing. What are the implications for the Prime Minister?
Well, this Sohail Rana fellow, who is the owner of the building, he promotes himself as the leader of the youth wing in the local area. But the government is saying that he's actually not, does not hold that position. But he's very well connected with the local member of parliament, who is from the ruling Awami League. So obviously the opposition had targeted on that, and public anger was directed at the government because of that. Now the government has distanced itself from Sohail Rana, has arrested him, and kind of putting himself up as the villain of the piece. So obviously the government is going to hang him out to dry. There's no doubt about that.
Now, there are a lot of politicians who have interests in the garment trade themselves, in such factories. Do you think that lessons will be learned from this disaster just because of the sheer scale of it?
The thing is that people expect something to happen this time because of the sheer scale of the disaster, and also because it's an election year. So the government needs to be seen to be doing something. But already we see that the Garments Exporters Association, the BGMEA, which is a very powerful body and which contains a lot of people very well connected to all the political parties, not just the current ruling party, they're actually sort of making efforts to protect themselves, and they're actually meeting a lot of representatives of buyers today as we speak. We don't know exactly what's happening there, what kind of message the buyers are bringing to them, or what kind of assurance they're giving them. But the BGMEA knows that something has to happen, some improvement has to be seen. But they're worried. They're worried that if the cost of Bangladesh garment is raised too high because of these compliance issues, then they might become uncompetitive in the international market. So there's a kind of a balance to be struck here.
Sabir, thank you. That was Sabir Mustafa, the head of the BBC Bengali service. Now on the newsroom, let's get more on that bomb attack on the Syrian Prime Minister Wael al-Halki. Syrian state television has carried out an interview with Mr al-Halki, saying it was filmed after the attack.
هذا الاجتماع الأخير بشهر نيسان. هذا الاجتماع نحن اليوم الاثنين 29.
Mr al-Halki made no reference at all to the attack on his convoy during the interview, but referred to exceptional circumstances in the country more than once. Well, our correspondent Jim Muir is watching events from neighbouring Lebanon. He joins us now. So, Jim, clearly he's unhurt, but what else can you tell us about what happened?
Well, clearly, as you say, he is unhurt. In that clip you played just now, he's saying the date and the day. So this is being billed as him going into an economic meeting shortly after the explosion. He looks a little bit slightly shaken, perhaps, but is answering in detail questions about the economic situation. He's quoted, in fact, inside the meeting as saying that terrorist attacks like this, as he called it, show only the bankruptcy and desperation of opposition groups in the face of recent victories, as he put it, by the Syrian army. So he is shrugging it off, but the TV pictures from the scene show, I would say, the results of a fairly medium-sized explosion. It's not massive, it hasn't left a huge crater, it doesn't seem to have blown out nearby buildings, but it completely wrecked one car, presumably the car that the bomb was in, left others on flames and damaged in flames, and damaged a bus as well. So quite worrying for the regime that this can be carried out in a place like Al-Mezzi, which is a highly secured government-controlled area just on the western side of Damascus. And it does seem, certainly according to the official accounts, that it was the convoy of Mr. al-Halqi, the Prime Minister, that was the target. But from the signs we're seeing, he does seem to have survived intact.
So what does this tell us about the strength of President Assad's opponents and the people who are attacking him?
Well, it shows that they can slip through the net, as they've done before, into highly secured areas which are, absolutely crucial to the regime's defence. Al-Mezzi has a noted military airport, which is very much involved in the defence of the inner sanctums of the regime, but that hasn't stopped the opposition, or presumed opposition, sneaking through on various occasions and carrying out explosions in very highly secured areas. In early December, for example, there was a very big attack on the Interior Ministry. Now, after that, the officials said that top members of the ministry had not been injured or killed, but in fact it turned out later that the Interior Minister himself had been quite badly injured, badly enough for him to be brought down to Beirut for some treatment at one stage, a little bit later, a week or so later. But on this occasion, it does seem that the bomb seems to have missed its presumed target, the Prime Minister.
Jim, thank you. That was Jim Muir in Beirut. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service, and Fiona has some of the day's other stories.
The Greek Parliament has approved a bill that will open the way for the first civil service layoffs in more than a century. The aim is to cut 15,000 jobs to guarantee a further $12 billion of international assistance. The government is also planning to axe 150,000 posts by the end of 2015. An Australian company has developed a way of removing space junk, such as debris from rockets, with powerful lasers. The European Space Agency has warned that junk needs to be removed from the Earth's orbit to avoid crashes that could cost satellite operators millions of dollars and knock out mobile and GPS networks. Our correspondent in Sydney, Phil Mercer, told us how the technology might work.
Essentially, it would work like this: by firing high-energy lasers at defunct objects in space to move them out of harm's way, just really like a cosmic game of chess, I guess. There was a recent space debris conference in Europe, and that warned that it was only a matter of time before there are collisions between satellites and space junk with potentially serious consequences for communications and security.
At least 7 people have been killed in clashes in western Mexico. Michoacan state government spokesman said drug gangs had fought with members of recently established vigilante groups. The area is a centre of drug production and distribution.
This is the newsroom. Now for some important news in the global efforts to tackle malaria. Scientists have been trying to work out why one of the most important malaria drugs has been rendered ineffective in some parts of Southeast Asia, and using genetic technology, they've come up with an answer. Our science reporter Rebecca Morel is here in the newsroom studio to tell us more. So what have they found, Rebecca?
So at the moment, artemisinin is a frontline drug used in the fight against malaria. It's incredibly effective, it's used around the world, and people treated with this drug, malaria clears up within a few days. But in 2008, reports started to circulate that there were some cases of drug resistance in Cambodia. So to investigate, scientists started to look at the parasite that causes malaria. So this is the parasite that's passed from mosquito to human through infected bites. and they took samples of the parasites from all over the world, from malaria hotspots everywhere, and basically sequenced their genome, so looked at their DNA. And what they found was that some of the strains of parasites in Cambodia, the ones which were actually